April 5th. Jesus of Nazareth was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. Acts 2:23 and 24. I once preached a Good Friday sermon called Who Put Jesus on the Cross? The title was borrowed from A.W. Tozer's famous book of the same name. Tozer concludes that it was you and I, our sin, that put Jesus on the cross. Of course, he is not wrong in his conclusion. However, I suggested that it was in fact the Father's will that was behind that fateful event. Peter makes the same assertion in his Pentecost sermon. He starts by saying that Jesus was handed over to the Jews. That word was commonly used for surrendering or delivering into the hands of the enemy. Who handed Jesus over to the Jews? Actually, to the chief priests and scribes? Who else but the Father, in his very act of sending his Son to the world? Then, the Gospel narratives tell us, the Jewish religious leaders handed Jesus over to Pilate and the Gentiles to be sentenced to death, and finally, Pilate handed him back to the Jews to be crucified. Peter is at pains to make two things crystal clear. First, the crucifixion of Jesus was a terrible act carried out by wicked men. Both the Jewish leaders and people, as well as the Roman authorities, were guilty of putting an innocent man to death. Second, the crucifixion of Jesus was within the ordained purpose of God, in line with his perfect plans for mankind. We encounter here the mystery of God's sovereignty and man's free will. I will not presume to know the answers to these age-old questions, but let us respond as Peter does. He trusts in God's foreknowledge and purposes in wicked circumstances, even as he judges those who have carried out that wickedness. The good news is that God did not hand over Jesus without setting a boundary to his suffering. The agony of death, more spiritual than physical, was overturned by raising Jesus to life. Therefore, we can, in our sufferings, even injustices, proclaim God's sovereignty, trust in his perfect purposes, and hope in his deliverance. Today's prayer. Lord, thank you for the perfection of your purposes and the hope of your deliverance.